Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, and welcome to our February Pull Up a Seat. Our conversation today is going to be a continuation of our No More Disparities, where we discussed why Black genes matter, really discussing genetic counseling and the importance of genetic counseling, genetic testing as it relates to within the breast cancer space. So we're glad to have you here. Feel free to add in the chat where you're chiming in from or any other information. We really want this to be a conversation. So as you listen in, if there are questions or comments, we can try to make this as interactive as possible. We can keep it live in the chat as we go through. So our agenda for today, we're going to go through, I just welcomed you all, introductions, 5 agreements of setting the space. And then for those who are new to Pull Up a Seat, we're going to share the reason for this and have our partner, GRASP, the co-founder of GRASP, Julia Maues, will share about GRASP and their mission. And then the keynote will be by Dr. Altovise Ewing. And then we will have our breakout rooms where we will share where each one of our patient experts will lead the conversation with our attendees. Thank you for those who pre-registered. We have already pre-assigned the breakout rooms. And those who are just joining, we'll make sure to add you in as we go along. So just bear with us during that time. For those who are going to be in the main room, we have a presentation by Lisa from Force, and she'll be sharing more about some of the resources that Force offers as it relates to genetic testing and counseling in that space, as well as some other great resource guides that we'll share. And then we'll reconvene to hear back from the breakout rooms, what were some of the takeaways and how we can move forward. And we'll open it up to everyone to have a conversation as well. So look forward to this and glad to have you here. So introduction, Ashley Dedmon, who is one of our patient experts, will be joining a few minutes late, but Ashley is a native Houstonian. And let's just continue to keep and lift up our friends and family that are in Texas that are going through it right now. Her even being here, and Lindsay as well. Lindsay is in Houston and has just gotten her water and power back on. So thank God for that. So let me just introduce Ashley. She's a native Houstonian. She holds a degree in, holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Community Health from Prairie View A&M University. She also earned a master's in public health from Florida A&M University. She is a certified health education specialist and holds a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt. She is an advocate for all health and wellness efforts, and she believes everyone deserves a chance to achieve optimal health. To do that, we must eliminate health inequities, health inequalities, and health disparities. We have with us as well Tiffany Smithson, who is a 35-year-old social worker, a wife, and mother of 2 boys. And she was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, her BRCA1, on March 17, 2020. She had a bilateral mastectomy March 31st, 2020, and has undergone 16 rounds of chemo before completing her treatment October 17th, 2020. And her final reconstruction surgery plus ovary removal was on December 29th, 2020. We have with us Josan Sutherland. Josan is not shy about her career with cancer, her journey with cancer, and neither is she daunted by it. She is beautiful inside and out, upbeat, cheerful, and without fear. Despite having 3 battles with cancer in her young life, bone cancer at 12, breast cancer at 21 and 28, Josan has successfully completed her studies and received several awards for academic excellence, including a Bachelor of Science degree with honors in physiotherapy from the University of the West Indies. Lyndsay Livingston is a multimedia expert, host, television talent, contributor, and educator. And she has appeared and contributed on Bold TV, NJTV News, PBS, New York's Verizon Fios, NY's One News, NBC Houston, Fox Houston, Fox Tulsa, and NTV Houston in various capacities, including anchor, host, reporter, and producer. Lindsay serves at Montclair State University School of Communication and Media as an adjunct professor, teaching writing for various media platforms. She also leads webinars for post-collegiates and aspiring journalists. And last but not least, we have Deltra Kroemer. Deltra is a home educating mama of 5 amazing girls who she strives to raise with cultural and health awareness. She's a chain tea drinker, wig hoarder, and lover of singing loudly and dancing unabashedly. Since being diagnosed with the triple negative MBC, she has focused on thriving through education, advocacy, exploring, connecting, and radical self-care. We are delighted to have you all here with us today. Our 5 agreements. So how to be in conversation. I would ask that you please monitor your airtime, speak your truth, speak from your own experience, lead with curiosity and not judgment, and keep the space safe. Our why. Our why is we want to save lives. That is our why. The image that is on the left is of one of our angel advocates who we lost last year, Shantae Randall. And we continue to lose women to this disease. And this is the reason why we continue on with the work that we're doing, continuing to reach and impact and affect change. That's the reason for this conversation. It's the reason why we're highlighting genetic counseling and genetic testing, and to give the tools to be able to make a difference and to change this outcome. So a little history about Tigerlily Foundation and the work that we've been doing as it relates to disparities and in this space. In 2019, we had the Black women at our Young Women's, we had a conversation with Black women at our Young Women's MBC Listening Summit. In November 2019, we launched the MBC's Disparities Advocacy and Educational Outreach Campaign and launched our Young Women's MBC Disparities Alliance on Capitol Hill in partnership with grassroots state and local, national, and global health partners and policymakers at our 7th annual Young Women's Breast Health Day on the Hill. In December 2019, we brought the largest group of young Black women, voices of young Black women to San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium in Texas. We also partnered with GRASP towards having a fireside chat and having a conversation together with scientists for poster sessions. In January 2020, we assembled a cohort of 20 Black women who represent Black women with the highest mortality, Black women in the cities with the highest mortality rates for a year-long intensive and immersive program that helps to mobilize these young women towards outreach and impact within their communities where they live and work. In February 2020, we launched our Listen Up MBC conversation, where it literally was just to listen, a space for those to listen, to hear about the experiences that Black women who have MBC are, what they're experiencing, and being able to just have a seat, have a space to speak and have a conversation. In May, we participated in ASCO's Confab with a virtual learning experience session focused on the needs of Black women. And in June of last year, we launched the Inclusion Pledge towards ending health disparities for Black women within our lifetime. So far, we have over 12,000 signatures, and including advocacy groups and pharmaceutical companies and individuals who have signed this pledge and are holding themselves and those around them accountable. These are some of our MBC Angel advocates from those 20 areas of impact. And I just wanted to just sort of share a little bit about the No More Disparities and Pull Up a Seat. No More Disparities is the first component of this conversational series that took place 2 weeks ago. And it's a conversation that's facilitated for and by Black women to create a safe space for this honest conversation. And that conversation really sort of brings in to ties into our Pull Up a Seat, which is what you're attending now. And that is co-hosted by Black patient experts and a Black medical health professional to really amplify the voices of Black men and women through candid conversations on topics ranging from racism in clinical trials to unequal healthcare practices, and in order to really find solutions to ending the high mortality rate for Black women. So I'm going to turn it over to GRASP, who is also our partner, to Julia, to share a little bit more about what GRASP is doing. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Shonda. So it's a pleasure to be here and see so many of you.
I'm
sorry. GRASP and Tigerlily came together to put on this series called Pull Up a Seat. And the idea is that we bring the model that we started with GRASP to the issue of disparities. So GRASP stands for Guiding Researchers and Advocates to Scientific Partnerships. What we do is we bring together patients with researchers, highlighting that patients are experts in living with cancer. So we really elevate that expertise, and we want to participate in discussions around cancer research or cancer policy as partners. We don't want to be talked to. We want to be part of the decision making. We want to be at the table. And so what we did is we brought together researchers and patients at scientific conferences. So what you can see is back in another life when we used to get together in person at conferences, you can see a number of patients and scientists walking together at the San Antonio Symposium and learning about the posters. The patients would share the experience of the person living with cancer, and the scientists would share the science. And we would together go much farther and learn from each other. So we have since transformed GRASP a little bit and brought it to a virtual stage. But really, the idea is that we're all walking at the same level. There's no microphone, there's no stage. Everyone has something to add. So in this collaboration with Tigerlily, what we did is we brought this idea to the amazing work that Tigerlily is doing on ending disparities. So when it comes to disparities work, the expert is the Black patient. Most of breast cancer patients are women. So the Black women living with a history of breast cancer, or in today's case, maybe a risk of breast cancer, they should be talking and they should be listened to. So the Pull Up a Seat is really for other people to pull up a seat and listen to these patient experts. Mute, you're mute.
Thank you for that, Julia. I just would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Altovise Ewing. And Dr. Ewing earned a PhD in genetics and human genetics with a specialization in genetic counseling from Howard University in 2011. She was a postdoctoral research fellow in cancer health disparities, in cancer health disparities, public health, genomics at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. As a clinician scientist, Dr. Ewing dedicates her professional career to ensuring that emerging genetic and genomic services and resources do not further exacerbate racial and ethnic health disparities. Dr. Ewing is a senior science leader in global health equity strategy for Genentech. Dr. Ewing, it's great to have you here. Before I turn it over to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. Before I turn it over to Dr. Ewing to give her presentation, I would just like to give a moment for our patient experts to introduce themselves as well. If Tiffany, if you could share, or just introduce yourself to the group, followed by Lindsay, and then and then Deltra and Josan and Ashley. Thank you.
Sure, you might hear background noise from my son who's probably watching YouTube right now. He needs home from daycare. So, but thank you so much for the introduction. As you had kind of shared with the group, I have paternal history of breast cancer, and genetic testing was pretty much prompted by my maternal aunt while hospitalized, and ended up passing away 3 months later in 2016. And it took about almost 3 years to get the necessary documentation required by my health insurance to even get genetic testing. So it was never brought up by my medical team whatsoever. And from there, I've had numerous mammograms, ultrasounds, MRIs, which kind of revealed basically a year later in 2020 that I had invasive ductal carcinoma, so triple negative breast cancer, and that immediately followed by the bilateral mastectomy, reconstruction, chemotherapy, and now I've been in remission for 3 months and had the last surgery in December. So all in all, I'm doing well, but I am grateful to have the opportunity to speak with other professionals about what our experience has been like.
Thanks, Tiffany. Lindsay Livingston. Sorry.
Good morning to you. I am Lindsay Livingston, and I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer July 2019 after discovering a small lump in my right breast. And excuse me, I underwent what was my first mammogram at the age of 37, 3D mammogram, breast ultrasound, biopsy, etc. I was living in the New York City area working in media at the time, so I relocated back home here to Houston to undergo treatment, care, etc., because I am surrounded by a village of love, and we know that's important as we are going through our journey. I underwent 15 rounds of chemotherapy, and halfway through, I would say after the 5th round, my nurse practitioner questioned my family history, and at the time, I didn't know of any family history until a cousin on my paternal side of the family suggested that I seek genetic testing because I am now the 13th Levingston female to have been diagnosed. And what I learned through a conversation with her is that the BRCA1 gene mutation runs rampant on that side of the family. So after undergoing genetic testing, it was determined that I do carry the BRCA1 gene mutation. So that changed my surgical plan. So after the 15 rounds of chemotherapy, instead of getting a lumpectomy and undergoing 6 weeks of radiation, that changed to what was recommended by my breast surgeon, to the bilateral mastectomy, breast reconstruction, and then the salpingo oophorectomy to remove my ovaries and fallopian tubes to reduce my risk of both the recurrence of breast cancer and ovarian cancer. I celebrated 1 year in remission on Valentine's Day. I actually was just in Miami celebrating, but I did make it home safely to Houston. So I'm very grateful to engage in this, what I think are extremely incredibly important dialogues and conversation around breast cancer as a Black woman. We know that our rates are higher than those of our white counterparts as it relates to the mortality rate. So thank you so much to the Tigerlily Foundation for this platform and for this space. I should also mention that I'm the founder of Survive Her. It's a breast cancer awareness and wellness platform to inspire, inform, and empower women around breast cancer awareness beyond the month of October. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindsay. And congratulations. Everyone was clapping. I couldn't see you, but we're all sending huge hugs and congratulations on your 1 year cancerversary.
Thank you.
Josan, Sutherland.
Okay, hello, good afternoon. I'm joining in from the UK and it's currently about 4 in the afternoon here, almost 4:30. So yeah, good afternoon. I'm Josan, and as Shanda had mentioned earlier, I am currently 28, and I must say I'm really grateful and really thankful at this point in my life to be able to say I've been diagnosed with cancer 3 times and I have survived all 3 bouts. I am originally from Jamaica, and so my cancer journey started really early in Jamaica at the age of 12 with bone cancer, moving on to breast cancer at age 21, which resulted in a whole host of surgeries and mastectomies and reconstructive surgeries, etc. And then another diagnosis at the age of 26, I believe I was at the time, in Jamaica with another type of breast cancer. It wasn't until that 3rd diagnosis that we were able to, I would say, easily go about genetic testing in Jamaica. And that's when I discovered I have Li-Fraumeni syndrome, which is a TP53 gene mutation, which I'll share more about, or you can Google it. It's very interesting. And thereafter, of course, more surgeries and more chemotherapy. The management for that initial stage of breast cancer ended. However, the management of now Li-Fraumeni and the rest of my life is still ongoing. And so that's the management that I'm currently undergoing here in the UK. Not because the health sector in Jamaica wasn't good, but actually because I beat cancer 3rd time and was able to go on to do my master's in neurological physiotherapy. So that's why I'm here in the UK right now, doing my master's program. I guarantee I do not look like this on a regular basis. So I'm really grateful and excited to be here to share my experience, not only as a woman with breast cancer, but a woman that experienced healthcare in, you know, a 3rd world quote unquote country and a 1st world country. So hoping I can contribute to the discussion today.
Thank you, Josan. Jamaica, big ups, and whoop, whoop, yes, big ups to you, and also for, yes, continuing to pursue your master's degree and just doing it up. You inspire us. You guys are so inspirational. The next person we have is Deltra Kroemer.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for being here. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. So I am Deltra. I'm 35 years old, mama of 5 girls from 5 to 15 years old. And back in the summer of 2019 at 33, I discovered a lump on my own, which is often the case for women my age, because no one was, checking for me. So I discovered a lump on my own and immediately went in to see my doctor. Thankfully, my doctor was not dismissive, despite me being young and not having a known family history. So got me in pretty quickly with, the whole ultrasounds and biopsy. So within about 2 weeks' time, it was confirmed that it was cancer. And from there, it was kind of a whirlwind of scans and tests, my first mammogram, really swept into the whole cancer world. And it was pretty crazy. And it only got crazier because just 3 weeks after finding out I had cancer, we found out that it was in my liver, which bumped me up and made me metastatic. One of the tests that my doctor included in all of the array of scans and tests was actually genetic testing. I hadn't heard of it. I didn't ask for it, but I'm extremely grateful for it. I have those documents filed for my daughters, and it's important to me now. And since then, I've been just educating myself on that importance. And for me, it's really about learning what I can do to help save other women, including my daughters, and make things better for them going forward. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Deltra. And Ashley Dedmon.
Morning, everyone. First, I would like to thank the Tigerlily Foundation for the opportunity to share my journey and for having this platform for this discussion. And really quickly, I just want to acknowledge my thoughts and prayers are with those who have been impacted by this winter storm. I'm in Houston, but I've been very fortunate to not have a major impact, but definitely thinking and praying about those who are still impacted by this. My name is Ashley. I am a BRCA2 previvor. Breast cancer impacted 3 generations of women in my family: my great-grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother, who had stage 4 metastatic breast cancer and passed away. And shortly after, my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He had a Gleason score of a 7. And I was 21 at the time, and I was scared. I really felt like I was next. And so I reached out to my doctor and I updated her on my family history. And that's when we began to have that collaborative conversation around genetic testing. And so at 21, I began seeing my high-risk oncologist and having biannual mammograms, MRIs, and ultrasounds to aggressively monitor my breast and ovarian health. I did that for about 10 years, and then I got married and had a baby, and breastfeeding was so important to me. And so I had the opportunity to breastfeed. But at that time, I did not have the same schedule, so to speak, to continue to go see or to keep up the increased surveillance. And so after a lot of prayer, at the age of 32, I believe I was, my husband and I decided to have a bilateral prophylactic mastectomy, which drastically reduced my risk from 87% down to a below 1 to 2% residual risk. And so very fortunate. And with this knowledge, I'm able to educate my daughters on who you can probably hear in the background, educate my daughters on not only my new standard of care, but their new standard of care. We kind of live in that universal precaution when it comes to BRCA. You know, until they get tested, until they choose to get tested, they are going to have those practices with their self mammograms, their self breast exams at home, and then of course living a healthy lifestyle until they get genetic testing. And I'm proud to announce just recently, I called my dad's urologist and I got him scheduled for genetic testing because you would think my mother would carry the gene because of the multiple cancers on her side, but because he has prostate cancer, and that is the leading marker for someone with this gene mutation. So I'm super excited. I had to call and be his advocate because he just did not know what to say or how to say it or what to ask for. So I was very proud for his willingness and to be able to advocate on his behalf so I could have some closure and get some questions answered. And because he has a sister and a brother and nieces and nephews. And so if he does carry that mutation, they definitely need to know. And in closing, I do a lot of volunteer work. I'm a cancer research advocate with Houston Methodist Research Institute, an education research advocate with the NIH and the NCI. I actively volunteer with FORCE as a peer navigator, an active volunteer with Tigerlily, and I also in 2016 authored a children's book entitled The Big Discovery, which helps families walk children through a breast cancer diagnosis. And I really pulled from when my mother was diagnosed and always asking her what was the hardest part of her journey. And she would always say, it was telling you, Ashley, that I'm sick and I have cancer. So thank you so much again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ashley. And I put in the chat to please drop the book link in the chat so we can support your book. Yes, thank you. So I would like to just share my screen again, and because I realized, thank you, it was on. Stop share. Wrong screen. But I wanted to share Dr. Ewing's slide, but it's okay. Anyway, I'm going to spotlight Dr. Ewing. And
will I have the opportunity to do a screen share on my end?
Yes, you will. I'm going to do it right now.
Great.
And so I'm going to pass the mic over to Dr. Ewing for a presentation. We're so glad to have you here.
Okay. Yes, first I'd like to thank Tigerlily Foundation for this opportunity today. And thank you to everyone who is here today. Thank you to all of the ladies who have shared your stories with us. You are definitely a source of inspiration, and in sharing your stories, you're helping to educate, inform, empower, and even help people find courage in navigating our own respective journeys. So thank you again. So let me share my screen. Right, and Shonda, are you able to see everything clearly?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right, great. So I'm going to set a timer for myself so that I do not go over time. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I was actually supposed to give a presentation yesterday. There were 3 of us on a panel. I was at the end and I did not get to present at all because one of the other presenters went over. He did a phenomenal job. But I do not want to eat into too much of the time that we have set aside for a discussion today. So today I hope to provide a high-level overview of some of the disparities that are observed within genetic counseling and with the utilization of genetic testing. And just wanted to disclose that I am a full-time employee of Roche Genentech. So 2 objectives that I'm hoping to cover today include examining genetic counseling and testing disparities experienced by underserved and underrepresented populations, and then also detail some of the challenges that really limit the translation of meaningful genetic and genomic research insights into clinically useful practices for diverse populations. And I always like to start my presentations by discussing the Human Genome Project. So that project was initiated in 1990 and it commenced in 2003. However, the first draft of the Human Genome was published in 2001. So that was around the time that I graduated high school. And when the project came to completion, I was actually in college. And for me, as I shared a couple of weeks ago, 2004 fall semester, my genetics course was really a pivotal point in my life where I had an epiphany that the knowledge that we were learning and had learned through the Human Genome Sequencing Project could be used to help potentially eliminate disparities. And at that time, there was a lot of information coming out about disparities between Black women and white women who were diagnosed with cancer. The fact that Black women at the time were less likely to be diagnosed, but more likely to die from the condition, and also more likely to be diagnosed with more advanced stages, as well as the most aggressive form of cancer. And for me, learning that we can identify if individuals are carriers of various mutations. And in some instances, knowing your genetic status could help guide your medical management moving forward. And in other cases, knowing your genetic status may even help prevent the onset of disease moving forward. I really saw it as an opportunity to really close that gap that we observe when it comes to health disparities between various groups, and to ultimately save more lives. So I was very optimistic in pursuing that journey. But I would say during this journey, I've had a number of rude awakenings and a number of realistic moments. And I've learned that there are disparities that exist along the genetics continuum. And some of those disparities exist even within the profession. I always describe myself as being a unicorn, one, because I'm trained as a genetic counselor, but also because I'm a Black woman who is a genetic counselor. Within the US, there are slightly more than 5,000 genetic counselors who are certified, and about 2% of us self-identify as Black. And that's according to a recent survey that was conducted. And I'll go into that a little bit more in detail. And then once we move from the profession, the profile, the demographic profile of professions within the field, and we look at genetic testing results. And anytime someone undergoes a genetic test, they have the opportunity to receive one of 3 results. Or you could actually receive a combination of those one of 3, but you may receive a positive result, a variant of unknown significance, or a negative result. And that variant of unknown significance, we abbreviate as a VUS. And what I learned during my study at Howard University is that when people from underrepresented populations underwent genetic testing, they were oftentimes more likely to receive that variant of unknown significance, which is really an ambiguous result. That means that we have a change. There is a change that's been detected in your DNA, but we just don't know if that change increases your risk for the onset of a condition or if that is a benign change that makes you unique. So the VUS is not really informative in guiding your medical management. So that was very unsettling to me to know that individuals from underrepresented populations are less likely to receive clinically useful information if they actually opt to go through with genetic testing. And then when we think about research, people who receive a VUS may receive information in the future that their VUS has been reclassified. It can be reclassified as a benign result, or it can be reclassified as a deleterious result, which means that it is a mutation. And to know that the ability to reclassify that VUS is a function of who is participating in the research. It's a function of who are the scientists conducting the research on? Who are they studying? What are the populations that are being studied? So there are a number of limiting factors that really impact the ability for that genetic testing result to be meaningful at times. And then when we think about the intersection of genetics, race, and inequalities, there are also some instances where we've learned that there are changes within the DNA that we know have associations with various conditions such as heart disease, but we are limited again in the data that we have. It's limited to the point to where we are not always returning those results to individuals. And that is something that again keeps me up at night and something that I am truly advocating for, to the point to where we take a health equity approach in returning results to various populations, although we may not have sufficient numbers compared to some of our counterparts or some of the European cohorts that we are studying. So again, I learned early that disparities really do exist along what is called a genetics continuum. So this is actually a word cloud from a presentation that I gave a couple of months ago where I posed the question, where does race appear within the context of genetic counseling? And this presentation was given to a group of genetic counselors. So you will see some of the words that were really pronounced or really stuck out during that presentation include pedigree, which is basically when you take a family health history and you draw it in that standard format. And I'll show you a picture of one of those a little later. Carrier screening and consanguinity. And I actually realized that when genetic counselors, when I asked this question, I also realized that I can insert the word disparity within the same question. And these are some of the same areas within the field of genetic counseling and genetics in general, where we see disparities arise as well. So just to quickly cover genetic counseling and genetic testing, genetic counseling is a process in which one may receive information about your risk for a condition that could be caused by a gene mutation. And this information is meaningful for you as a patient, as well as for your family members. So when one meets with a genetic counselor, you'll oftentimes have the opportunity to provide that family health history information that will be collected in the form of that pedigree. And then the pedigree will be very informative in determining if you are an appropriate candidate for genetic testing, or if perhaps someone else in your family may be a better candidate to test at the time. And then when genetic testing is presented as an option, genetic testing can be thought of as the examination of the DNA, so our chemical bases, to really identify if there is a change in your DNA that we know is associated with an increased risk for a particular condition. And oftentimes in a clinical setting, this DNA testing may be performed on blood, saliva, or even in some instances, it may be a tumor biopsy or a skin biopsy. And then when we think about the different types of genetic tests that are available, as this is an evolving landscape, in some instances, one may undergo testing where we are looking at solely one gene to see if there are changes within that one gene, or you may undergo what is called a multi-panel test. And this is where we are looking at multiple genes at one time. So we're looking to see if perhaps there is a mutation present in any one of the genes that are included on that panel. And then some of the more larger scale genetic tests that are available today include exome sequencing and whole genome sequencing. So this is what exome sequencing is, where we are looking at those genes that we know encode for proteins, and then whole genome sequencing is where we are looking at the entire genome, those genes that code for proteins as well as those non-coding regions as well. And just again to highlight some of the disparities that exist within the genetic counseling profession, I mentioned earlier that there are more than 5,000 certified genetic counselors in the United States. And in this first circle on the right, to date in 2021, we only see that 1 out of 10 genetic counselors self-reports as an individual from an underrepresented population, so from a minority population. And then from an ethnicity standpoint, 97% of counselors do report as being non-Hispanic. So hopefully this is something that will change in the future. We do have a number of initiatives, a number of collaborations that are in place to really change the demographic of the profession, including the Minority Genetics Professional Network, which I know Shonda will speak about a little bit later, and I'll share more details about that then. But it's a phenomenal network of genetic counselors where we are there to offer support to one another, to really affirm each other's presence in the space, because it can be quite isolating. I can recall being at one of my first genetic counseling conferences in Philadelphia in about 2008, 2009. And I recall looking around the room, and I think I was probably one, actually I was about 4 of about 2,000 women in the room, 4 Black women in a room of 2,000. And I really questioned if I deserved to be there and if I truly wanted to be there in that space, and how much of a difference I could truly make. And I can say that MGPN, the Minority Genetics Professional Network, again, affirms each and every one of our purposes in this space. And then we also have a mentor-mentee network in place as well, where we are really pouring into prospective students who want to pursue the profession as well. And then in this top image, I just really wanted to highlight that genetic counseling will be key in our ability to deliver on precision medicine and personalized health as well. So what are some of the benefits of genetic testing when we think about cancer? So genetic testing offers the opportunity for us to better understand risk for cancer or cause for cancer diagnosis, opportunities to guide medical management, risk management, as well as inform family members of potential steps that they can take for their medical management as well. I mentioned earlier, when one undergoes genetic testing, there are 1 of 3 types of results that you may receive. And then again, it is possible for you to receive a combination of any of these 3 results, especially if you undergo multi-gene panel testing. And that is the case because the more genes that we look at, the higher the chance of receiving a variant of unknown significance in some cases, especially if it's in a gene that has been not well characterized or that is a little less studied in general, but also in certain populations. And even when one receives a negative genetic testing result, that really has to be interpreted within the context of your personal health history and your family health history. For instance, it was up until about 2013 that most individuals who underwent genetic testing may have only had BRCA1 and BRCA2 testing ordered. So let's say prior to 2013, one may have received a negative result, but that negative result may have only been specific to your BRCA1 and BRCA2 results. status. And even then, it's very important to know what type of testing was performed. Was there sequencing of the entire gene? Did they look to see if there were deletions or possibly duplications of that region? So it's very important to know what type of tests you've undergone, what was the testing methodology, and what genes were included. Because in some instances, women or men who tested negative for BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutations prior to 2013, when they underwent testing post 2013, they were actually found to be carriers for a completely different gene that they were not tested for in the past. So this is why really knowing more information about your test and interpreting those results within context is key. So when we think about disparities in genetic testing results, I've already touched on the fact that individuals from underrepresented populations are more likely to receive variants of unknown significance. Knowing a patient's BRCA mutation and variant status is important for prevention and treatment decision-making. Even when one receives that VUS again, it's a possibility that VUS will be reclassified. And if it's reclassified as a mutation, as a pathogenic variant, then that is going to be very key in being able to really pursue more personalized care and risk management. Improving the characterization of mutations and variants. I'll take about 2 more minutes, Shonda.
Keep on going. Okay. Yeah, keep on going. You're good.
Okay, all right, thank you. Improving the characterization of mutations and variants ultimately will lead to better management, treatment, and breast cancer prevention efforts in African Americans. And it will also inform future personalized healthcare and genomic-based clinical studies. And these are some of the findings that came out of a publication and research study that I had the pleasure of contributing to at Howard University, where Dr. Louis Elric-Santi was the primary investigator. And again, just to highlight the importance of family health history, on the left, I share a resource that is very helpful, where if you wanted to start a conversation today with your loved ones to really start collecting that family health history information, this is a portal that you could use to upload that info. This is a resource that I use to share with all of my patients as a clinical GC. And then on the right, I share an image of that pedigree that I mentioned earlier. When you are collecting family health history information and you're chatting with your provider, it's important to discuss at least 3 generations of family health history. That's where we will be able to really glean the most information and optimize that information to really make a well-guided and informed decision in terms of the type of testing to offer, and even present you with information so that you can ultimately make your autonomous and informed decision about pursuing testing. But at least 3 generations is recommended, and it's equally important to collect that information on mom and dad's side of the family. So as our ladies had mentioned earlier, sometimes individuals may assume that a mutation may be traveling or tracking on mom's side of the family. And that's because in some instances, some people are misinformed and that they believe that men cannot pass on mutations to their children. And sadly, in some instances, there are some healthcare providers who believe that men cannot pass along a BRCA mutation to their children as well. So mom and dad side, maternal and paternal, are equally as important. And here I just wanted to highlight that within the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines that are used, the ability to determine if someone is a candidate for genetic testing relies on one's personal health history as well as your family health history. So this is why, again, knowing that family health history is key, because it could be the difference in whether or not someone is able to pursue genetic testing or not, and whether or not one's insurance company may or may not cover it. And just to quickly highlight some of the differences, disparities, as well as barriers in utilization of genetic counseling and testing. There's been a breadth of research conducted as it pertains to genetic counseling and testing. And we do observe that there are racial differences in the use of BRCA testing, even in women who have a family health history of various cancers and an increased risk. Sometimes that may be a function of limited knowledge about the resources, limited knowledge in terms of how that information could be used, as well as some cultural differences. However, there are also instances where we know that healthcare providers are not referring or recommending women who are at increased risk, and even in some instances, women who have mutations in their family. So healthcare provider biases also contribute to some of those trends that we see. There is a law in place, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which protects individuals from insurance discrimination as well as employment discrimination in the event that you are identified to be a carrier of a gene. In Dr. Sutton's study, and hopefully most of you are aware of Dr. Arnethia Sutton, in her study, she identified that Black women are not really very confident in the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. And this law, the perception about this law could actually impact whether or not people are pursuing genetic testing. And then in another study, the big reveal identified that there are differences in family disclosure patterns when someone is identified as a BRCA carrier mutation. In some instances, it was identified that some people may feel embarrassed about this particular result, or may not really see the value in sharing that information maybe immediately with family members, or in some instances, it's possible that individuals may need that help, support, and resourcing in knowing how to really share that information with family members. In here, I just wanted to highlight very quickly is that the majority of the information that we know about a number of the genes today, a number of the mutations today, is a result of the research that has been conducted. And that's a result of the people who are oftentimes more likely to contribute or more likely to participate in the research. And oftentimes those individuals may not look like myself or may not come from underrepresented populations. But these studies just really affirm that when we do conduct the research and we are inclusive of populations that are underrepresented, underserved, and understudied, when we look, we actually find mutations. And those mutations that we find oftentimes extend beyond just BRCA genes. So if we look at multiple genes, again, there's a possibility that we may find mutations in those others as well. So that's why it's very important for genetic testing, genetic counseling to be offered to all patients, to all populations. And here I just really wanted to highlight that when you are providing information about your family health history and that pedigree is being compiled, you may also have to answer a question about your ancestry. So someone may ask you if you know what country your ancestors are from. And this is informative because it can, again, help guide the type of test that is offered to an individual. Some of the panels are really ethnicity specific because, again, we may know a little bit more about one population than another. And as a result, we are able to offer refined or curated panels or tests to certain groups. But what is disturbing about this is that there really is no standard collection process of this information in the field. And we are actually at a turning point to where we realize that someone may tell us they are of a particular ancestry, but their DNA may tell us a completely different story. So we want to be very cautious in how that information is interpreted, because ultimately we do not want to run the risk of not offering the appropriate test to someone based on maybe their limited understanding of their ancestry. And the last few slides, I just wanted to really highlight the importance of research on our ability to really glean clinically useful information from genetic tests. So as I've mentioned, when we look at the people who are oftentimes participating in research, oftentimes those individuals are of European descent. And studies from 2009 to 2016 indicated that there was an improvement in terms of the representation of minority populations in research, but the vast majority of participants are still of European ancestry. And even the change that occurred between 2009 to 2016, it did not necessarily occur equitably, but we saw this drastic change, this drastic increase of people of Asian ancestry, more so than other groups. So this is something, again, that really limits our ability to interpret some of the genetic testing results and ultimately, again, offer those precise and clinically informative risk management strategies and even surgical options to patients. So this is why I really highlight the importance of participating in research, considering research, because ultimately it impacts the type of care that we are able to offer. It impacts the guidelines and the policies that are established, and it's impacting in real time the advancements in the field of genetics. Some of those advancements include polygenic risk scores, and then some of those guidelines include the NCCN guidelines, as well as the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics recommendations on what genes, what mutations to provide back to people. Again, this is all a function of research. And I know that we have a representative from FORCE here, which I'm really excited to hear about, because they do have a research study where if you receive a VUS, you can help contribute to what we are learning about VUSs in real time to help us, again, be able to better reclassify and accurately classify those variants. And then also wanted to highlight the All of Us research study, which is an opportunity to enroll millions of people within the US from underrepresented walks of life. And then I will end with this last slide, that ultimately the inclusion of diverse and underrepresented populations in research is paramount to making healthcare equity a reality. Again, the intersection of genetic testing and research they coexist, they're intertwined. And what we are able to offer in clinic is ultimately a function of who is participating in research, who is conducting the research, and what is being conducted. So I do encourage people to really learn more about research opportunities, to try to get clarification on what research is, what it is not, because ultimately it can impact the healthcare quality that we all receive. And just to highlight some references and resources. Great. Thank you. Sorry about the time, Shonda. Hopefully I didn't take too much time.
You didn't. This was incredibly informative. And this is the reason that we're here, is to learn. And so even if we went over a little bit, it's worth it, because this information and knowledge has to be shared. So thank you so much for sharing. We have different comments and questions in the chat, which we'll share later on. Which include talking about, I'll just sort of highlight some of the questions. Some of the questions are about the genetic testing and specific cases, NCCN as well, and also discussing as well about the insurance and the challenges with that. So we can go into that a little bit deeper after we break out into our breakout rooms. And so I want to give us time to do that. And thank you, Lisa Schlager, as well, for chiming in the chat from FORCE, giving some different guidelines. As you were going through, she was sort of giving some, sharing some additional details about that. So we're going to now, with all this information, I'm sure there's a lot for us to discuss and digest and go into. So we're going to delve into that. So thank you for those who were able to join and have to leave at the top of the hour. We appreciate your participation. For those who are still able to stay, we're going to now break out into groups with each of our patient experts. And then those will also have some, and those who aren't in those breakout groups will be in the main room, and we'll have a conversation here and hear about, hear from Lisa Schlager of FORCE about the work that they're doing and some of the resources that they can provide. So I am going to, I am now, thank you. Thanks, Denisha. I'm now host of that. One moment. Just bear with us as we just break.
Recent research and media coverage. So, sometimes you see that headline in the newspaper or across the, or across a TV news broadcast, or even on Facebook, and it says, oh, new vaccine fights breast cancer or whatever, and you're like, oh wow, and you read it, and then you start wondering, well, how accurate is this, and does it really apply to me, and how far down the road is this? And that's what X-Rays does. So every week we publish an X-Rays review, and you can actually get an email update when it's posted. And you can look at those reviews. I'm happy to share my screen, but I think it would just take time to do that. It's very easy to find under the education tab on our website. And you can check it for each one that's done, it'll say who this applies to. So does it apply to women or men? Does it apply to metastatic, people with metastatic breast cancer? And it evaluates how well done the research is, whether it was conveyed properly in the media. It really helps you understand the headlines and recognize that a lot of times they're not exactly as accurate or reflective of reality as we might like. So it's a great way to assess those types of things.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you. Everyone is back in the room. Thank you all as well for your patience as we, there's the logistical issues that we did have this time, but we're glad that you were still able to at least have a conversation within your breakout rooms for the period of time that we had. And for those who were able to participate in the larger room, thank you, Lisa, for your presentation, and for Force being here to be able to share about that. I just wanted to, give our patient experts an opportunity to share a bit about what, what was discussed, what was able to have been discussed during your breakout rooms, and we can take it from there. So I know that we did have two of our patients, experts were in group 4. And so I would like to, ask if, that group 1 and group 4 were combined. So if Josan and Ashley could at least sort of give some, share a little bit about, what was discussed in your breakout room.
Hello again, everyone. So our breakout room was a bit short and we didn't really get to discuss much. I heard from the other 2 ladies in my group, so Kathleen and Silkley. Did I pronounce that right? Great. So about what they were expecting, coming into this meeting, to learn more about how they could, I know for Zilka, she wanted more Black women to be a part of a lot more research that was taking place in her community. And for Kathleen, it was to learn about basically how to bridge the gap, and to bridge the gap with that disparity as it relates to Black women, and ovarian cancer in her community. And then I shared a little bit about just my journey and the conversation surrounding genetic testing. That for me, it didn't really come into play until after my 2nd diagnosis. And then even then, it wasn't really a conversation. It was just more, how do I put it? The note at the end of a session, the note at the end of a meeting where I think you should get genetic testing, and then it just went thereafter. And it wasn't until after my 3rd diagnosis that I sought out genetic testing and have really begun to have that conversation with my health team around what it means for me, what it means for my family. Because especially in Jamaica, I feel like BRCA1 and 2 gene mutations are more so common and known, but not so much Lee-Fermini syndrome. And so just having that conversation with them, and just to educate. And whilst my diagnosis of that mutation is, I would say, under a year ago, I found out, or a little over a year, I don't remember exactly when. So I'm hoping to learn more while I'm here in the UK and bring that back home when I go back home to Jamaica, to continue or to have discussions like these where, I can talk to healthcare professionals and make them aware of it and the treatment that's surrounding it, the monitoring, and hopefully make the conversation surrounding genetic testing a more common one. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Josan. And thank you, Ashley, as well, for participating in that conversation. Going to ask from Lindsay, if you could share about your group as well.
Sure. So our room consisted of an oncology nurse who works in cancer research and 2 survivors, of one of whom was diagnosed at the age of 22, very young. The overall theme of our discussion consisted of advocating and simply encouraging family and friends to seek genetic testing. We also talked about the stigma in the African American community that we don't want to know what's in our bodies, we don't discuss it. Or when a family member passes away, we don't know the why. Sometimes it was just, oh, so-and-so was sick. But we should be, I think, empowered to respectfully ask what our family history is. How did Aunt so-and-so pass away, so that we can save generations to come? So really, we were just talking about the importance of seeking genetic testing, how it can increase the years of survivorship or survival, whether or not you're tested positive or negative. Overall, it's simply about preserving generations and legacies of women.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's so important about sharing. And you're absolutely right. It definitely is in our community that we don't, it's just sort of a hush hush situation, or you find out years later what the real reason was. And, they're like, you hear family members say, oh, but I thought I told you. Actually, no, you never did. Nope, that never popped up. Yeah, but I think he did have prostate cancer. Okay, this is the first time I'm hearing about it. It's been X amount of years. So it's so important, you're right. And especially to what Dr. Ewing was saying about knowing 3 generations, like Ashley shared in her story about her family history and the importance of that, it's so important. So thank you for sharing, and for those who participate in that conversation. I'm going to ask Deltra if you can also share from your group, what were some of the takeaways?
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So my group was actually really small. It was just me and pretty much one other person. One had to run, but I think she dropped info about her organization in the chat. But we actually ended up discussing something else that's really of importance to me, kind of the mental health aspect, and just coping with such a diagnosis as mine. So we got into that discussion, which, like I said, is pretty important to me, right up there with, I think, my children knowing the importance of things like genetic testing, is them understanding the importance of navigating all this, my own diagnosis, because your diagnosis affects your entire family, not just physically, but mentally as well. So we kind of talked about that and how I've been managing that. I shared, I'm a big advocate for therapy. And so I have a therapist, my children have their own therapist. And in my household, I just really try and normalize mental wellness, sharing when you're struggling with your mental wellness. So hopefully that plays into in the future. As I've seen discussed here, I saw some in the comments mentioning how it should, I think it was Shanda actually said, it being as routine, genetic testing just being as normalized as getting your annual physical, and that's kind of what I want for when it comes to, just like I don't want any more, as we said, secrets about our physical health. I don't want it to be like a big hidden thing when someone's struggling with their mental health as well. We all know that cancer diagnosis, brings up a lot of emotion to navigate for everyone in the family, the person living with it, and and their children and siblings and parents. So that was really kind of the discussion that we ended up getting into organically.
Thank you. Thanks,
Yeah.
Deltra, for sharing. And, even the smaller, the intimate conversations are still so important because you get to have those one-on-one.
Very much so.
Yeah, and really get to connect. So thank you for that. And last but not least, Tiffany, could you share about your breakout room?
Sure. I concur. The breakout room was kind of small and intimate, which was nice. But it was also very brief. So it included me, of course, dropping some tears because I'm a crybaby. It's very emotional moments for me. But it consisted of one person just wanting to know what their family history is, like having those important conversations, and kind of bringing awareness to what our family history is, because in the African American community, we tend to not ask those questions. Like they're just not asked. And as I sit here and we talk more in depth about it, my sister recently asked me why, what really happened to my mom, who passed away not even 8 years ago. So and we haven't really told her what happened. So those are tough conversations that people need to have and to understand our family history, and what they're at risk for. We also had an OBGYN who's African American as well, kind of putting the responsibility on the physician and what questions they can bring to the patient or should be asking of the patient, and also highlighting the family history stuff. So tough conversations that need to be had.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you. Thank you all for leading those conversations. I know that they were they're shorter than usual, but still glad that you were able to participate and have that conversation, and those who were able to participate as well, to have those one-on-one and engage in that space. I know that there were also some questions that we had for Dr. Ewing that had come up in the chat. So I know that in our main group, we had a presentation by Lisa Schlager from Force, who gave an informative presentation on the different resources that Force offers, and provided a lot of really great insight on that. And we'll also be sharing that with everyone in the that is a participant in this. And so in terms of, I guess, next steps and just the way forward, I'd love to open it up as well to the audience for those who were able to participate in the small groups, who are still here. If there are any comments or questions that you wanted to raise to the group or to Dr. Ewing regarding genetic testing, like Deltra said, and was written in the comments too, that it really should be something that's standard. Why is it that, I remember Tiffany, I think it was in the No More Disparities, you said it took you, it was 3 years?
Yes.
Going 3 years to get genetic testing and having to go back and forth for your insurance company to cover it. That's absolutely ridiculous. So, I just want to open it up for us to continue that conversation, and what can we do, even in terms of policy, or what to make sure that this is covered, and that, it's accessible. So, if anyone has any, thoughts.
I guess this is Lisa Schlager. I'll jump in again. But I think as far as coverage goes, a lot of insurers develop their own coverage policies. They're typically informed by things like NCCN guidelines and the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, which in a lot of cases are a little more conservative than we might like. And the landscape is evolving quickly, and they are starting to improve coverage, but there's still pretty strong requirements on, how many family members should be affected before they're willing to test you, or what types of cancer. And sometimes you really have to self-advocate. And unfortunately, it's the people who are probably least equipped to advocate for themselves that might need to do that. So, that's why organizations like ours and Patient Advocate Foundation and some other groups step in to try to help when it seems obvious that someone needs testing and they're not able to get it. I will say testing has gotten much more affordable. You can get tested for a 30 gene multi-panel test, $250 or less now. So it is possible to get testing covered or, done without going through insurance and not breaking the bank. But it's something we're working on. It's just going to take some time.
Other thing that I wanted to mention is that in some instances, like NCCN and the U.S. Preventative Task Force, they make their recommendations based on evidence, which is basically a function of the data that are generated from the research study. So I think this, again, is where being an active participant in research can eventually have an impact on the policies that are implemented and recommended and services that are accessed as well. The other thing I wanted to share that I actually learned as a clinical genetic counselor is that oftentimes the laboratories will be willing to work with patients and family members to identify affordable options for genetic testing. So never be afraid to share your situation, never be afraid to ask and to advocate, because some of the laboratories do have compassionate care programs where they can offer genetic testing at a deeply discounted price. I wanted to mention that, and then also wanted to mention how critically important it is to engage your healthcare provider, again, so that they are aware of your personal health history, family health history, because I know some of the direct to consumer and consumer initiated options are being pursued, and those are ways that you can get your certain genes tested, not necessarily comprehensive testing, but if you do pursue that route as well, it's very important, again, to make sure your healthcare provider is a part of that journey, the healthcare journey, so that you, again, are accessing the appropriate medical care and recommendations that are tailored to meet your needs.
Thank you. Thank you for answering those questions. We have a raised hand from Dr. Yamika Connor. Did I pronounce your name?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
One thing I would love to see is that, patients and patient advocates are actually push back more responsibility on the medical system and the scientific research body, because as was previously mentioned, a lot of these guidelines were developed and normalized to a population that really doesn't include us. And so it's unclear what the value of it when you apply it to our population. And these aren't questions that are unknowable. We can know them. And it's the responsibility of the healthcare community to really drive that. I do not believe it's the fact that African Americans or people of color do not participate in medical research or genetic research because they don't believe in the value of that. There are much more ingrained systemic issues that we need to address. And, as much, I want communities of color to feel that you can do the best you can with the information you have, but we need to demand better, and better is possible. It really is a responsibility of the people who do this professionally. To really think about the science in a meaningful way, and the fact that very little doctors even can realize there's a difference, and how you can apply, the positive predictive value of a test depending on the population. I think that just speaks to how much we need to grow.
Thank you, Dr. Connor, for sharing that as well. Yes, definitely. Thank you for your comment. I know that there was a question as well in the chat earlier for Dr. Ewing about the genetic testing guidelines for NCCN. And the question was, what are your thoughts about broad panel genetic testing in all diagnoses and partnered with genetic counseling to get a better idea of what additional genes may be part of the risk narrative?
Right. So as a genetic counselor, I do believe the decision to pursue genetic testing is an individualized exercise. So I do not think that necessarily one size fits all as it pertains to testing. But I could see that being presented as an option, but I think it would be equally as important to emphasize the benefits as well as the limitations of offering a broader panel to individuals based on their cancer type. And again, with some of those limitations being that the more we seek, the more we may find, but those finds may not always be informative depending on your ethnicity, depending on if you are a member of an understudied and underrepresented population. That's again where you may be more apt to receive one of those variants of uncertain significance that is not as clinically informative in guiding your medical management at the moment. But again, I think this also underscores why it is important to, I keep going back to this, be involved in research. And as Dr. Connor said, be involved as an advocate and an active research participant. And if you have the opportunity, sit at the table with the researchers to co-create those research ideas. 2 weeks ago, I spoke about community-based participatory research, which is a mechanism where individuals can partner with researchers to come up with the hypotheses, the questions that are being asked, so that we ensure that the questions that are being asked are meaningful to the populations that are oftentimes disproportionately burdened by cancer and other conditions. So you can be a citizen scientist and make a meaningful difference in science. And Dr. Connor, I really loved your comment. That is a fight that I find myself enduring every single day. Ironically, I had a meeting right before the presentation where I'm a research consultant on a project where it's an opportunity to engage an African-American population that has not been involved in genetics research. And something that I alluded to in my presentation was a condition called hereditary amyloidosis, where we know that there is a variant that is more likely to be found in people of African descent. About 4% of individuals of African descent in the US carry the variant called V122I. However, that is not information that we are sharing with individuals. And that is information that at the end of the day could save a life, because it may allow us to intervene to offer appropriate screening, more frequent screening, and to even better characterize the symptoms of that condition so that we can ultimately prevent it. But if we're unable to prevent it, catch it as early as possible, as opposed to someone passing away from it or being turned away from the ER and then passing away shortly afterwards because we did not know they were a carrier and because we could not characterize their chest pain and other symptoms because it's a rare condition. When it's not rare, maybe it's classified as rare now because enough people are not studying it, it's not prioritized, or it's not being studied in the right population. So this is why it's just critically important for us to be represented in research at all levels, as the researchers, as participants, as policymakers on the back end. Like, we have to really be present, have a pervasive presence throughout that research continuum. So as you can tell, it's something I'm very passionate about, and definitely something that keeps me up at night.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for sharing. And yes, it's great to hear that passion about it as well. And I wanted to share, I had mentioned in the earlier as well about the Minority Genetic Professionals Network resource. And I just wanted to share the link with you all, as well as a space as well for those who are interested in mentoring or getting understanding, who are interested in this career, to be able to really have an impact, like Dr. Ewing was saying, on the research as well. It's great that we also need to have more more genetic counselors and genetic nurses and physician assistants that are of color. So this is a great resource for students and trainees. I highly recommend checking them out. I know that Dr. Ewing as well is a part of this group. So if you have questions, they're also on Twitter, but please make sure to look them up as another resource. And I just wanted to, because I know we have a few minutes left, I wanted to just share thank everyone for your participation today and your participation and also your patience with some of the logistics. Sometimes these things happen, and but what's most important is ensuring that this information is shared and that creating a space for each one of these women who have taken time out of their days to be here to share about the importance of their experience and to continue to move forward with this. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for your presence, for sharing, and for listening and really hopefully moving this forward, continuing to ensure that genetic testing, genetic counseling is available, made it's easier, more easily accessible. Thank you to Force for their information that they have on this topic, for Dr. Ewing, and for those other doctors who were on the call, especially those of color, for continuing to push forward when you're the only person or there are only 4 of you in the room. Thank you for that. You're so appreciated. And you know, we look forward to continuing to push that forward and getting more researchers, more younger young men and women to also pursue the field of STEM. I wanted to share with you guys to please make sure to follow these our incredible panelists, Dr. Ewing on IG and Twitter, and Lindsay Livingston. As she mentioned, she has her own foundation is called Survive Her. Please follow her on IG and Twitter and learn more about what can be done. Josan, who is in the UK, and just such her experience of being in to having cancer treatment and receiving that in 2 different locations is just, it's very helpful, that knowledge. And thank you for being here. Tiffany Smithson, who is literally just, you know, out the gate, you've been going through it and you're still here to be able to share with us. So we just appreciate you so much, and your voice and your story. And I know that there's more to come. So thankful for you to be on this journey with you. And Deltra, phenomenal. Deltra, mom of 5, doing it up. Thank you for your input, and Ashley for your, you know, your sharing about your TED Talk and your book and being a voice, and you know, the work that you're doing with Force, with all the different, with Tigerlily, with other organizations. You know, it's really appreciated. And yes, so please take a screenshot of this. We'll also post it online, this recording, so that those who had to hop off at noon will be able to see this. And just to share as well, our next conversation will be in March. It'll be March 3rd and the 19th. And we'll be discussing patient advocacy and policy change to end health disparities. This is sort of what, you know, we sort of touched upon this as well in terms of talking about insurance, coverage, and those kind of issues. So what can we do to continue to move that forward? That's what we're going to talk about and dive into. If you have any suggestions or recommendations as well about those who you would be interested in participating in that, please let us know. And I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who's on the list to just thank you for your time. So thank you all so much. Thank you to all of our participants and speakers for being here and for your contribution to this important topic. I hope that you all have a wonderful day and the rest of the weekend, and look forward to, yes, continuing to move forward. So I hope have a great day. And I don't know if anyone wants to share anything before we hop off, because it's 1 o'clock. I want to honor everyone's time. But if any of our patient experts want to say anything, feel free. Okay. All right. Have a nice day. Thank you all so much. We'll be in touch.